The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished marble floors of Kensington Palace as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, walked purposefully through the corridors that had once echoed with Diana's laughter. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the stone, each step measured and deliberate. Today was different from any other day in her royal life. Today, she had made a decision that would shake the very foundations of the monarchy's most sacred traditions. The previous evening had been a turning point. Catherine had attended a private dinner with several prominent charity leaders, discussing upcoming events for her various patronages. During the conversation, Lady Margaret Thornfield, a longtime friend of the Spencer family, had mentioned Diana's jewelry collection in passing. The comment was innocent enough, but it planted a seed that had grown overnight into something much more significant. Catherine had always felt a strange connection to Diana, despite never having met her predecessor. The weight of following in the footsteps of the people's princess was something she carried daily. Every public appearance, every charitable endeavor, every moment in the spotlight was measured against Diana's legacy. The press constantly drew comparisons, and the public seemed perpetually divided between those who embraced Catherine and those who felt no one could ever replace Diana's unique magic. As she entered her private study, Catherine's gaze fell upon a photograph of Diana wearing the famous sapphire and diamond necklace that had become synonymous with her image. The piece, originally a wedding gift from the Queen Mother, had been one of Diana's most treasured possessions. After Diana's death, it had been carefully preserved in the royal collection, occasionally worn by other members of the family for state occasions, but never with the same grace and significance that Diana had brought to it. Catherine had worn many pieces from the royal jewelry collection over the years, but this particular necklace had always remained just out of reach. There was an unspoken understanding that it was too precious, too symbolic of Diana's memory to be worn casually. But Catherine had begun to question whether preserving it like a museum piece was truly honoring Diana's memory or simply maintaining an outdated reverence that served no one. The idea had started small, but, by morning, it had crystallized into a firm resolve. Catherine wanted to wear Diana's necklace to the upcoming state dinner with the French president. It wasn't just about the jewelry itself, it was about making a statement. She wanted to show that Diana's legacy could live on through her, that the monarchy could honor its past while moving boldly into the future. She picked up her phone and dialed Angela Kelly's number. Angela had served as the Queen's personal assistant and senior dresser for decades, and now managed much of the royal collection's more significant pieces. The conversation would need to be handled delicately. "Good morning, Angela," Catherine said when the call connected. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all, Your Royal Highness. How may I assist you today?" Catherine took a deep breath. "I'd like to discuss wearing a particular piece from the collection for next week's state dinner. The sapphire and diamond necklace that belonged to Diana." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Angela had been through enough royal dramas to know when a simple request was actually anything but simple. "I see," Angela replied carefully. "That's quite a significant piece, Your Royal Highness. Might I suggest we schedule a meeting to discuss the details? Perhaps this afternoon?" "That would be perfect. Shall we say 3 o'clock?" After ending the call, Catherine felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. She knew that requesting Diana's necklace would send ripples through the palace staff, but she hadn't anticipated just how quickly word would spread through the royal household's intricate network of communication. By noon, whispers had begun circulating among the staff. The housekeepers, the security personnel, even the kitchen staff seemed to know that something significant was brewing. The palace had its own ecosystem of information, and news of Catherine's request traveled faster than a royal decree. Lady Sarah McCorquodale, Diana's sister, received a phone call from a well-meaning palace insider just before lunch. The conversation was brief but loaded with implication. Sarah immediately understood the delicate nature of the situation. As one of Diana's closest living relatives, her opinion would carry considerable weight in any decision about Diana's jewelry. Sarah had always maintained a complicated relationship with the royal family since Diana's death. She respected the monarchy and understood the difficult position they had all been placed in, but she also felt a fierce protectiveness over her sister's memory and belongings. The necklace in question wasn't just jewelry to her, it was a tangible piece of Diana that still existed in the world. She decided to call Charles directly. Despite their complex history, she had always found the king to be reasonable and considerate when it came to matters involving Diana's legacy. "Your Majesty," she began when Charles answered his private line, "I believe we need to discuss Catherine's request regarding Diana's necklace." Charles had been expecting this call. He had received word of Catherine's request within hours of her conversation with Angela Kelly. The palace's information network was thorough, and matters involving Diana's belongings always reached his attention quickly. "Yes, Sarah. I was hoping we might speak about this. What are your thoughts?" "I understand Catherine's position," Sarah said carefully. "But that necklace holds particular significance. Diana wore it to some of her most important charitable events. It's not just jewelry, it's part of her story." Charles nodded, even though Sarah couldn't see him. "I appreciate your perspective. And I share your concerns about treating Diana's memory with appropriate respect. What concerns me," Sarah continued, "is the precedent this might set. If Catherine begins wearing Diana's most iconic pieces, what message does that send? That Diana's legacy is something to be inherited rather than honored separately?" The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with both parties trying to navigate the complex emotions and protocols surrounding Diana's memory. By the end of the call, Charles had committed to handling the situation personally rather than leaving it to palace staff. Meanwhile, Catherine spent the afternoon in meetings, but her mind kept returning to the necklace. She had expected some resistance, but the growing sense of tension in the palace was more intense than she had anticipated. Staff members who usually greeted her warmly seemed slightly distant, as if they weren't sure how to behave around her anymore. When 3 o'clock arrived, Catherine made her way to the jewelry room where Angela Kelly was waiting with several other members of the royal household staff. The room itself was like stepping into a treasure trove, with glass cases lining the walls displaying centuries of royal jewelry. But Catherine's attention was immediately drawn to one particular case. There it was, Diana's necklace, resting on cream-colored velvet, the sapphires catching the light from the chandelier above. Even in the display case, it seemed to radiate the same warmth and elegance that Diana had brought to everything she touched. "It's beautiful," Catherine said softly, approaching the case. "Indeed it is, Your Royal Highness," Angela replied. "Princess Diana wore it to 43 documented public events. It was photographed more than any other piece in her collection." Catherine studied the necklace more closely. Each sapphire was perfectly cut, surrounded by brilliant diamonds that created an intricate pattern of light and color. She could understand why Diana had favored it so much. It was stunning without being ostentatious, elegant without being cold. "What would be the protocol for wearing it?" Catherine asked. Angela exchanged glances with the other staff members present. "Typically, pieces of this significance require approval from His Majesty. Given the particular history of this necklace, I would strongly recommend requesting his permission before proceeding." Catherine felt a flicker of frustration. She had hoped to handle this matter quietly, without drawing Charles into what should have been a straightforward decision about jewelry. But she was beginning to understand that nothing involving Diana's memory was ever straightforward. "Very well," she said. "I'll speak with His Majesty directly." As the meeting concluded, Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that she had set something in motion that was beyond her control. The request for a necklace had somehow become a test of her place within the royal family, her relationship with Diana's memory, and her understanding of the delicate balance between honoring the past and creating her own legacy. That evening, as she and William discussed the day's events, Catherine found herself second-guessing her decision for the first time. "Do you think I'm making a mistake?" she asked him as they sat in their private sitting room. William considered the question carefully. His relationship with his mother's memory was complicated by his own grief and his role as Diana's son. "I think," he said finally, "that you have every right to wear pieces from the royal collection. But this particular necklace, it might be worth considering the timing." "What do you mean?" "The anniversary of her death is approaching. The press will be looking for any story they can find related to Diana. If you wear her most famous necklace now, it might overshadow whatever message you're trying to send about your charitable work. Catherine hadn't considered the timing aspect, and William's point resonated with her. The media's relationship with Diana's memory was complex and often exploitative. Any action involving her belongings was likely to be scrutinized and sensationalized. "But if I back down now," Catherine said, "won't that send a different kind of message? That I'm intimidated by Diana's shadow?" William took her hand. "You've never been intimidated by anything in your life. But sometimes the strongest choice is knowing when to step back and reconsider." As the evening wore on, Catherine found herself torn between her original conviction and growing doubts. She had wanted to honor Diana by bringing her jewelry back to life, but the reaction from the palace staff and the Spencer family suggested that her gesture might be interpreted very differently than she had intended. The next morning brought news that would complicate matters even further. Charles had requested a private meeting with Catherine to discuss her request. The meeting was scheduled for the following day at Clarence House, and the formal tone of the invitation suggested that this conversation would be more significant than she had anticipated. Catherine spent the day preparing for what felt like the most important discussion of her royal career. She researched the history of the necklace, studied photographs of Diana wearing it, and tried to articulate exactly why this piece held such significance for her. The necklace had been commissioned in 1981 as a wedding gift from the Queen Mother. Diana had first worn it to a charity gala just months after her marriage, and it had quickly become one of her signature pieces. She had worn it to events supporting causes close to her heart: AIDS research, homelessness charities, and children's hospitals. In many ways, the necklace had become a symbol of Diana's compassionate approach to royal duty. Catherine realized that her connection to the necklace wasn't just about its beauty or its royal significance. It represented everything she admired about Diana's approach to public service. By wearing it, she wanted to signal her commitment to carrying forward Diana's legacy of using royal status to highlight important causes and connect with people who were struggling. But she was beginning to understand that symbols are powerful precisely because they mean different things to different people. To her, the necklace represented inspiration and continuity. To others, it might represent appropriation or insensitivity to grief that was still raw even after all these years. As she prepared for bed that night, Catherine looked once more at the photograph of Diana wearing the necklace. Diana's smile in the picture was radiant, her eyes sparkling with genuine joy as she interacted with supporters at a charity event. Catherine wondered what Diana would have wanted. Would she have been pleased to see her jewelry worn again, bringing light and attention to important causes? Or would she have preferred for her most personal possessions to remain untouched, preserved as monuments to her memory? The uncertainty was unsettling, but Catherine knew that tomorrow's conversation with Charles would force her to defend her position or reconsider it entirely. Either way, the decision about Diana's necklace had become about much more than jewelry. It had become a defining moment in her role as Princess of Wales and her relationship with the most complicated legacy in modern royal history. The palace fell quiet as midnight approached, but, in several different residences, people lay awake thinking about the same sapphire and diamond necklace and what it represented to each of them. The stage was set for a conversation that would determine not just who could wear a piece of jewelry, but how the royal family would navigate the delicate balance between honoring the past and embracing the future. The morning of Catherine's meeting with King Charles dawned grey and overcast, matching the somber mood that had settled over the royal household. News of the necklace controversy had somehow leaked to the press overnight, and, by breakfast time, several tabloids were already running speculative stories about tensions between Catherine and the Spencer family regarding Diana's jewelry collection. Catherine read the headlines with growing dismay as she sat in her morning room at Kensington Palace. "Kate's jewelry grab," screamed one particularly inflammatory headline, while another asked, "Is Kate trying to replace Diana?" The stories were full of unnamed sources and wild speculation, but they captured something that made Catherine's stomach turn. Her genuine desire to honor Diana was being twisted into something grasping and calculated. She set the newspapers aside and focused on preparing for her meeting with Charles. The king had been nothing but supportive during her years in the royal family, but she knew this situation was different. Diana's memory was one of the few topics that could still cause visible emotion in the usually composed monarch, and Catherine wasn't sure what to expect from their conversation. William had offered to accompany her to Clarence's house, but Catherine had declined. This was something she needed to face alone. Her relationship with Charles had developed into something genuinely warm over the years, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to royal duty. She hoped that foundation would be strong enough to weather this particular storm. At Clarence's house, Charles was experiencing his own complex emotions as he prepared for the meeting. He had spent the morning reviewing correspondence from Diana's friends and family members, all of whom had strong opinions about Catherine's request. Some supported the idea of Diana's jewelry being worn again, arguing that Diana would have wanted her beautiful things to bring joy rather than gather dust in storage. Others felt deeply protective of Diana's memory and worried that allowing Catherine to wear her most iconic pieces would somehow diminish Diana's unique legacy. The King's private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, had prepared a briefing on the legal and protocol aspects of the situation. Technically, Catherine had every right to request any piece from the royal collection for official engagements. The jewelry belonged to the crown, not to any individual, and decisions about its use were ultimately at the monarch's discretion. But protocol was one thing, family sensitivity was quite another. Charles remembered the day Diana had first worn the necklace. She had been nervous about a major charity gala, unsure of herself in the early days of royal life. The necklace had given her confidence, made her feel beautiful and worthy of her role. Later, as Diana grew into her position and found her voice, the necklace became part of her armor, a beautiful reminder of her own strength and purpose. Now, nearly 3 decades later, Catherine was asking to wear that same piece. Charles could understand the appeal. Catherine faced many of the same challenges Diana had encountered, navigating public scrutiny while trying to make a meaningful difference through royal duty. But he also understood the concerns of those who felt Diana's most personal possessions should remain uniquely hers. When Catherine arrived at Clarence's house, she was escorted to Charles's private study, a comfortable room filled with books, family photographs, and personal mementos from his decades of royal service. Charles stood as she entered, greeting her with the same warmth he always showed, but Catherine could sense an underlying tension in his manner. "Catherine, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a comfortable chair near the fireplace. "I thought we should discuss this matter face to face rather than leaving it to staff to handle." Catherine settled into the chair, grateful for the informal setting. "Thank you, sir. I realize this has become more complicated than I initially anticipated." Charles took the chair across from her, his expression thoughtful. "Let's begin with your perspective. Help me understand why this particular piece is important to you." Catherine had rehearsed this conversation in her mind, but, now that the moment had arrived, she found herself speaking from the heart rather than from preparation. "I've always felt a deep connection to Diana's approach to royal duty," she began. "The way she used her position to shine light on important causes, her genuine care for people who were struggling. When I think about that necklace, I don't just see jewelry. I see a symbol of using beauty and privilege for something meaningful." Charles nodded thoughtfully. Diana did indeed approach her role with remarkable compassion. That necklace was with her during some of her most significant charitable work. "Exactly," Catherine continued, encouraged by his understanding. "I thought that wearing it to the French state dinner could be a way to honor that legacy while highlighting the causes we're supporting. The dinner is raising awareness for children's charities, which was so close to Diana's heart." "I can see the reasoning behind your request," Charles said carefully. "But I'm sure you can also understand why this has raised some concerns among Diana's family and friends." Catherine felt her cheeks warm slightly. "I never intended to cause distress to anyone. The last thing I would want is to appear disrespectful to Diana's memory or to hurt her family." Charles was quiet for a moment, studying Catherine's earnest expression. He had watched her grow into her royal role over the years, had seen her navigate challenges with grace and determination. He knew her request came from genuine admiration for Diana, not from any desire to replace or diminish her memory. "The challenge," Charles said finally, "is that symbols are powerful things. Diana's jewelry, particularly that necklace, carries emotional weight that goes beyond its material value. For many people, it represents Diana herself, and the idea of someone else wearing it feels like an intrusion into something sacred." Catherine felt a surge of frustration, though she tried to keep it from showing. But, isn't it also possible that keeping it locked away diminishes its power? Diana wore beautiful things because she understood that appearance matters in royal duty. She knew that a stunning necklace could capture attention that could then be directed toward important causes. That's a fair point, Charles acknowledged. Diana did indeed understand the power of image in service of substance. Their conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. Sir Clive entered with a message that Lady Sarah McCorquodale had arrived and was hoping for a word with His Majesty. Charles looked at Catherine. Sarah specifically asked if you would be willing to speak with her as well. I think it might be helpful for all of us to discuss this together. Catherine's heart rate quickened. She had met Sarah only a few times at royal events, and their interactions had always been pleasant but formal. She wasn't sure what to expect from this conversation, but she agreed to the meeting. When Sarah entered the study, Catherine was struck again by her resemblance to Diana. The same bone structure, the same elegant bearing, though Sarah's expression was more guarded than Diana's had ever been in public. "Thank you both for agreeing to see me," Sarah said as she took a seat. "I realize this is a delicate situation, and I wanted to share my thoughts directly rather than have them filter through intermediaries." Catherine felt her stomach tighten. "Of course. I very much want to hear your perspective." Sarah looked directly at Catherine, her expression serious but not unkind. "I want to begin by saying that I have tremendous respect for the work you do and the way you've approached your role in the family. Diana would have appreciated your commitment to the causes you support." "Thank you," Catherine replied quietly. "However," Sarah continued, "I do have concerns about the precedent we might be setting. Diana's jewelry collection represents more than just beautiful objects. Each piece carries memories, moments from her life that can never be repeated. That necklace was with her during some of her most important work, her most meaningful moments." Charles listened carefully as Sarah spoke, understanding the protective instincts that drove her concern. "I wonder," Sarah continued, "whether there might be other ways to honor Diana's legacy that don't involve wearing her most personal possessions. The work you do speaks to Diana's values much more powerfully than any piece of jewelry could." Catherine felt a mix of disappointment and understanding. "I can appreciate your concerns," she said. "But I also wonder whether preserving Diana's things like museum pieces truly serves her memory." Diana was vibrant and alive. She would have wanted her beautiful things to be seen, to continue making a difference in the world. Sarah's expression softened slightly. "I don't disagree with that sentiment entirely. But this particular necklace, it was photographed with Diana hundreds of times. It's become inseparable from her image in the public mind. If you wear it now, every photograph will invite comparison. Every article will focus on whether you're trying to recreate Diana's magic rather than celebrating your own unique contributions." The observation hit Catherine harder than she had expected. She hadn't fully considered how wearing the necklace might overshadow her own work and cause people to focus on comparisons rather than on the causes she was trying to support. Charles observed the exchange between the two women with growing understanding of the complexity involved. This wasn't just about jewelry or protocol, it was about how to honor one person's memory while allowing another person to create her own legacy. "Perhaps," Charles suggested gently, "we might consider a compromise that respects everyone's concerns while still acknowledging Catherine's desire to honor Diana." Both women looked at him expectantly. "What if," he continued, "Catherine were to wear a different piece from Diana's collection? Something beautiful and significant, but less iconic than the sapphire necklace. It would still be a way of honoring Diana's memory while avoiding the specific sensitivities surrounding her most famous piece." Catherine considered the suggestion. Part of her remained disappointed about the sapphire necklace specifically, but she could see the wisdom in Charles's proposal. The goal had never been to wear that exact piece, it had been to honor Diana's legacy and approach to royal duty. Sarah also seemed to consider the compromise carefully. "That might be acceptable," she said finally. "Diana had many beautiful pieces that weren't as photographically iconic. She would have been pleased to see them worn in service of charitable causes." Charles felt a sense of relief beginning to build. "Catherine, what are your thoughts on this approach?" Before Catherine could respond, another knock interrupted their conversation. This time, it was William who entered the study, his expression serious and somewhat troubled. "I apologize for interrupting," he said, "but I think you all need to see this." He handed Charles a tablet displaying a news website. The headline read, "Palace Civil War, Kate Battles Diana's Family Over Iconic Necklace." The article was full of leaked details about their private discussions, complete with quotes from unnamed royal sources that made the entire situation sound like a bitter family feud. Catherine felt sick as she read the distorted version of events. Her genuine desire to honor Diana had been transformed into a narrative of greed and insensitivity. The article portrayed her as someone who was ruthlessly trying to appropriate Diana's identity for her own purposes. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Sarah said quietly. "The press will turn this into a circus regardless of what we decide." William sat down heavily in another chair. "It gets worse. I've been fielding calls all morning from other news outlets wanting statements. This story is going to dominate the news cycle for days, maybe weeks." Charles set the tablet aside, his expression grim. The leak could have come from anywhere. Too many people knew about these discussions. Catherine felt overwhelmed by how quickly the situation had spiraled beyond her control. "I never wanted any of this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "All I wanted was to honor Diana and support important causes." Sarah reached over and touched Catherine's hand gently. "I believe that was your intention. But intention and perception don't always align, especially when it comes to Diana's memory." The room fell silent as all four occupants grappled with the reality that their private family discussion had become public entertainment. The necklace that had started this conversation seemed less important now than finding a way to contain the damage and restore some dignity to the situation. William was the first to speak. "We need to control this narrative before it gets even more out of hand. If we don't provide some kind of statement, the speculation will only get worse." Charles nodded in agreement. "But we also need to be careful not to validate the premise that there was ever a serious conflict. This was always a family discussion about how best to honor Diana's memory." Catherine looked around at the three people who had become central to her royal life: her husband, her father-in-law, and Diana's sister. Despite their different perspectives, she realized they all shared the same fundamental concern about protecting Diana's legacy and maintaining the dignity of the royal family. "What if we turned this situation into something positive?" she suggested. "Instead of just defending our positions, what if we used this attention to launch something meaningful in Diana's memory?" The others looked at her with interest. "I mean," Catherine continued, warming to the idea, "the press is focused on Diana's charitable work because of this controversy. What if we announced a new initiative in her honor? Something that captures the spirit of what she cared about without getting tangled up in questions about jewelry?" Sarah's expression brightened for the first time since entering the room. "That's a wonderful idea. Diana would have loved the thought of controversy being transformed into charitable action." Charles smiled slightly. "It would certainly be a more constructive use of all this attention than endless speculation about family tensions." As the afternoon wore on, the four of them began sketching out ideas for a positive response to the media storm. The conversation gradually shifted from damage control to genuine excitement about creating something meaningful in Diana's honor. But, even as they planned, Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that the fundamental questions raised by her original request remained unresolved. The necklace might have been set aside for now, but the larger issues about legacy, memory, and how to honor the past while building the future would continue to challenge her role as Princess of Wales. The media storm that had erupted around Catherine's request for Diana's necklace showed no signs of abating as the days passed. What had begun as a private family discussion had transformed into a global conversation about royal protocol, family loyalty, and the complex legacy of the people's princess. News channels ran endless discussions with royal experts, former palace staff members shared their opinions on talk shows, and social media buzzed with passionate debates about whether Catherine's request had been appropriate. Catherine found herself at the center of a controversy that felt increasingly surreal. She had made what seemed like a reasonable request to wear a piece of jewelry from the royal collection, and somehow it had become a symbol of everything from generational conflict within the monarchy to questions about women competing for public affection. The distortion of her intentions was painful, but the intensity of public interest was overwhelming. At Kensington Palace, the staff moved with particular care, aware that every conversation might somehow find its way into the press. Catherine's private secretary, Hannah Cockburn-Logie, had instituted new security protocols for all communications, and even routine scheduling meetings felt charged with unusual tension. William watched his wife navigate the storm with growing concern. He had seen firsthand how destructive media attention could become, and he worried about the toll this prolonged scrutiny would take on Catherine. During their private moments together, he could see the strain in her eyes, the way she carried herself as if bracing for the next unexpected blow. "I keep thinking I should have anticipated this," Catherine said one evening as they sat in their private sitting room, the children finally asleep upstairs. "I've been in this role long enough to know how these things can spiral." William shook his head. "You couldn't have predicted how far this would go. Your request was completely reasonable. It's not your fault that someone leaked private family discussions to the press." "But Sarah was right about one thing," Catherine replied. "That necklace is so closely associated with Diana that wearing it would have inevitably invited comparisons." "Maybe I was naive to think otherwise." "Or maybe," William suggested gently, "you were just trying to honor someone you admire. There's nothing wrong with that impulse." Meanwhile, at Clarence House, King Charles was dealing with the political ramifications of the controversy. The Prime Minister's office had quietly inquired whether the situation required any official response, and several Commonwealth leaders had reached out with diplomatic concerns about potential instability within the royal family. What had seemed like a minor internal matter was beginning to affect the monarchy's public standing. Charles's greatest concern, however, was for Catherine herself. He had watched her mature into one of the royal family's greatest assets, and he worried that this controversy might damage her confidence or her relationship with the public. More personally, he was troubled by the idea that his own family was being portrayed as divided and dysfunctional. The king called a meeting with his senior advisors to discuss how to address the situation more effectively. The group included Sir Clive Alderton, his private secretary, Sir Edward Young, who had recently transitioned from serving the late Queen, and Rebecca Deakin, who had been brought in specifically for her expertise in managing public relations crises. "The fundamental problem," Rebecca explained as they reviewed the latest coverage, "is that we're being reactive instead of proactive. Every day we don't provide a clear narrative, the press creates their own version of events." Sir Edward nodded in agreement. "The speculation is becoming increasingly divorced from reality. I've seen reports suggesting everything from Catherine being disciplined by the palace to the Spencer family demanding the return of all of Diana's possessions." Charles felt frustrated by the impossibility of correcting every false story without giving even more attention to the controversy. "What do you recommend?" "I think," Rebecca said carefully, "that we need Catherine to make a public statement that addresses this directly but also demonstrates her continued commitment to her royal duties. Something that shows she's not been diminished by this experience." The suggestion made sense, but Charles worried about putting additional pressure on Catherine. "Let me speak with her first. This decision should be hers to make." That same day, Sarah McCorquodale was dealing with her own media pressure. Reporters had begun camping outside her home, hoping for statements about her feelings regarding Catherine and Diana's jewelry. Old friends were calling with concerns about how the controversy was affecting Diana's memory, and several Spencer family members had reached out to express their opinions about how the situation should be handled. Sarah found herself in an unexpectedly difficult position. She genuinely liked Catherine and respected her dedication to royal duty, but she also felt a fierce responsibility to protect Diana's legacy from being commercialized or trivialized. The media attention was forcing her to take sides in a conflict she had hoped could be resolved privately. Her brother, Earl Spencer, called from Althorpe House to discuss the situation. As Diana's closest living male relative and the keeper of the Spencer family's historical legacy, his opinion would carry considerable weight in any family decisions. "I've been watching the coverage," he told Sarah, "and I think we need to be very careful about how we respond. Diana belonged to the world in many ways, but she was also our sister. We have a responsibility to speak for her when she can't speak for herself." Sarah appreciated her brother's support, but she also recognized the complexity of the situation.
Catherine isn't the enemy here, she said. Her request came from a genuine place, even if the execution was problematic. I agree, Earl Spencer replied. But, we also can't allow Diana's most personal possessions to become political tools or fashion statements. There has to be some boundary between honoring her memory and appropriating her identity.
Meanwhile, the press had begun to dig deeper into the history of royal jewelry and its distribution among family members. Several articles appeared detailing which pieces Catherine had worn from various collections, with particular attention to items that had previously belonged to the Queen Mother or other deceased royals. The coverage suggested that Catherine's request for Diana's necklace was part of a broader pattern of her claiming significant jewelry from the royal collection. The portrayal stung Catherine deeply because it misrepresented her actual relationship with royal jewelry. She had always been thoughtful about which pieces she chose for public events, often selecting items that had historical significance or that would complement the causes she was supporting. The suggestion that she was somehow grabbing jewelry for personal aggrandizement felt like a fundamental misunderstanding of her character and motivations. The situation reached a new level of intensity when several of Diana's former friends began speaking to the media. Rosa Monckton, who had been one of Diana's closest confidants, gave an interview defending Catherine's right to wear pieces from the royal collection while also emphasizing the unique bond Diana had with her jewelry.
Diana chose her jewelry very deliberately, Rosa explained in the interview.
Each piece was selected to enhance her work and send specific messages about the causes she supported. The sapphire necklace wasn't just beautiful, it was part of Diana's armor, her way of feeling confident enough to tackle difficult subjects. The interview was widely quoted and added another layer of complexity to the public discussion. Rosa's comments were generally supportive of Catherine, but they also highlighted just how thoughtful Diana had been about her public image and how difficult it would be for anyone else to wear her pieces without inviting comparison.
Catherine read the interview with mixed feelings.
She appreciated Rosa's balanced approach, but the description of Diana's thoughtful jewelry choices made her wonder whether her own request had been sufficiently considered.
Had she really thought through all the implications of wearing such an iconic piece, or had she been drawn to it primarily because of its beauty and history?
The internal questioning was interrupted by a call from Charles, who requested another meeting to discuss potential next steps. This time, he suggested they meet at Windsor Castle, away from the London palaces where press attention was most intense. Catherine arrived at Windsor on a crisp autumn afternoon, the ancient castle grounds providing a sense of historical perspective that felt appropriate for their conversation. Charles met her in the oak drawing room, where portraits of previous monarchs seemed to watch over their discussion about balancing personal desires with royal responsibility. "I've been thinking about our previous conversation," Charles began, "and about the broader questions this situation has raised."
Catherine nodded, settling into her chair. "It's become much larger than anything I anticipated."
"Yes, it has. But perhaps that's not entirely a bad thing," Charles said thoughtfully. "This controversy has forced all of us to examine how we approach Diana's legacy and how we balance respect for the past with the needs of the present."
"What do you mean?"
Charles walked to the window, looking out over the castle grounds where so much royal history had unfolded.
"Diana's death left us all uncertain about how to honor her memory appropriately.
We've been cautious, perhaps overly so, about anything that might seem to diminish or commercialize her legacy.
But caution can become paralysis." Catherine felt a spark of hope. "So you think wearing her jewelry might actually be appropriate?"
"I think," Charles said carefully, "that Diana would want her beautiful things to serve a purpose beyond preservation. She understood the power of image in service of substance. But I also think we need to approach this more systematically than requesting individual pieces for specific events." Charles returned to his chair and leaned forward slightly.
"What if we developed a broader framework for how Diana's jewelry could be used to support charitable causes? Something that involves her family in the decision-making and ensures that her pieces are worn in contexts that truly honor her values?"
The suggestion intrigued Catherine. It addressed both her desire to honor Diana and the Spencer family's concerns about protecting her legacy.
"How would that work practically?"
We could establish a committee that includes representatives from Diana's family, the royal household, and, perhaps some of her former charitable partners. They could review requests for wearing her jewelry and ensure that each use genuinely serves Diana's memory and advances causes she cared about.
Catherine considered the proposal carefully.
It would mean giving up some autonomy in her jewelry choices, but it would also provide a structure that could protect against future controversies while still allowing Diana's pieces to make a difference in the world.
I think that could work, she said finally. But, what about the current situation? The press is expecting some kind of resolution.
Charles smiled slightly.
I have some thoughts about that as well. What if we used the French state dinner as an opportunity to launch this new initiative?
You could wear a different piece from Diana's collection, one that the committee had specifically chosen to honor her memory and support the evening's charitable focus. The idea began to take shape in Catherine's mind. Instead of the controversy being about her personal desires, it could become about finding better ways to honor Diana while supporting meaningful causes.
Which piece were you thinking of?
Diana had a beautiful emerald and diamond bracelet that she wore to several children's charity events. It's significant enough to carry meaning but not so iconic that it would overshadow the evening's purpose.
Catherine felt a sense of relief beginning to build.
The emerald bracelet would still allow her to honor Diana while avoiding the specific sensitivities around the sapphire necklace.
I think that could be perfect, she said. But, what about Sarah and the Spencer family? Will they support this approach?
I've already spoken with Sarah about the general concept, Charles replied. She's cautiously optimistic. The idea of having ongoing family input into decisions about Diana's jewelry addresses many of her concerns. As their conversation continued, Catherine felt increasingly hopeful that they had found a path forward that could satisfy everyone's concerns while still achieving her original goal of honoring Diana's memory. The committee structure would provide ongoing protection for Diana's legacy while ensuring that her beautiful possessions continued to serve meaningful purposes. But, even as they planned the details, Catherine remained aware that the public damage from the controversy would take time to repair. The narrative about her relationship with Diana's memory had been complicated by weeks of speculation and sensational coverage. Rebuilding public trust would require more than just wearing a different piece of jewelry. It would require demonstrating through her actions that her motivations had always been genuine and selfless. The meeting concluded with plans for Charles to contact Sarah about finalizing the committee structure and for Catherine to prepare remarks for the state dinner that would explain the new initiative. As she prepared to leave Windsor, Catherine felt both relief and apprehension about the challenges that lay ahead. The evening of the French state dinner arrived with an unusual sense of anticipation throughout the palace. What should have been a routine diplomatic event had taken on heightened significance because of the weeks of controversy surrounding Diana's jewelry. Every detail of Catherine's appearance would be scrutinized, every choice analyzed for deeper meaning about her relationship with Diana's legacy and her position within the royal family. Catherine stood in her dressing room at Kensington Palace, surrounded by her styling team, as they made final preparations for the evening. The emerald and diamond bracelet that had been chosen as Diana's representative piece lay in its case nearby, catching the light from the chandelier above. It was undeniably beautiful, with an Art Deco design that reflected the sophisticated elegance Diana had favored in her jewelry choices. Angela Kelly had personally delivered the bracelet that morning, along with a detailed history of its significance. Diana had worn it to 12 documented charity events, including a memorable evening supporting Great Ormond Street Hospital and a gala for the National AIDS Trust. The piece carried genuine meaning without the overwhelming symbolic weight of the sapphire necklace. "It's perfect," Catherine's stylist, Natasha Archer, said as she fastened the bracelet around Catherine's wrist. "It complements your dress beautifully without overwhelming the overall look." Catherine had chosen a deep blue gown by one of her favorite designers, elegant enough for the formal state occasion while remaining appropriate for the serious tone she wanted to set. The emerald bracelet provided just the right amount of sparkle and historical significance without appearing ostentatious. As she prepared for the evening, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The simple request to wear Diana's sapphire necklace had evolved into something much more complex and meaningful. The committee that had been established to oversee the use of Diana's jewelry would provide a lasting framework for honoring her memory while supporting charitable causes. It wasn't the outcome Catherine had originally envisioned, but it was perhaps a better one.
William appeared in the doorway, resplendent in his evening dress uniform.
"You look beautiful," he said, but his expression also conveyed understanding of the significance of this particular evening.
"Are you ready for this?"
Catherine nodded, though she felt the familiar flutter of nerves that accompanied any high-profile royal event.
"I think so."
"The committee approach feels right, and Sarah seemed genuinely pleased with how everything has developed."
"The press attention will be intense tonight," William warned gently. "Every photograph will be analyzed for signs of how you're handling the controversy."
"I know," Catherine replied. "But I also think tonight gives us a chance to show that this was never about personal ambition or trying to replace Diana. It was about finding ways to honor her while doing meaningful work." At Clarence House, King Charles was making his own final preparations for the evening. He had spoken with the French president earlier in the day, ensuring that the diplomatic aspects of the dinner would proceed smoothly despite the media attention surrounding Diana's jewelry. The French delegation had been gracious about the unexpected focus on royal family dynamics, but Charles was determined that the evening's charitable purposes wouldn't be overshadowed by personal drama.
Sir Clive Alderton briefed Charles on the media arrangements for the evening.
Interest from the press was significantly higher than usual for a state dinner, with requests for coverage coming from international outlets that typically didn't focus on royal events. "The focus will inevitably be on the Princess of Wales and whatever jewelry she chooses to wear," Sir Clive noted.
"But the speech you've planned should help redirect attention to the charitable initiatives being supported."
Charles had indeed prepared remarks that would formally announce the establishment of the Diana Legacy Committee, the new body that would oversee the use of Diana's jewelry for charitable purposes.
The announcement would transform the evening from being about controversy to being about constructive action in Diana's memory.
Sarah McCorquodale had been invited to attend the dinner as a special guest, a gesture that symbolized the Spencer family's support for the new approach to honoring Diana's legacy. She had initially hesitated to accept, concerned about becoming part of the media spectacle, but ultimately decided that her presence would demonstrate family unity and approval of the committee structure. As Sarah prepared for the evening at her London residence, she felt a complex mixture of emotions. The past few weeks had forced her to think deeply about Diana's memory and how it should be preserved and honored. The solution that had emerged wasn't perfect, but it addressed her primary concerns while still allowing Diana's beautiful possessions to serve meaningful purposes. Her daughter had helped her choose an elegant black dress for the evening, and Sarah had selected a simple pearl necklace that had belonged to her mother. She wanted to look appropriate for the formal occasion without competing for attention with Catherine or the significance of Diana's bracelet. The dinner itself was held in the state dining room at Buckingham Palace, with its grand table set for over 150 guests. The room's portraits of previous monarchs provided a sense of historical continuity that felt appropriate for an evening that was fundamentally about balancing respect for the past with the needs of the present.
Catherine entered the receiving line wearing the emerald bracelet with quiet confidence.
The piece caught the light beautifully as she shook hands with guests, but it didn't dominate her appearance or distract from her engaging conversation with the French delegation. Several guests commented specifically on the bracelet's beauty, providing natural opportunities to mention its connection to Diana's charitable work. When Catherine was introduced to Madame Brigitte Macron, the French president's wife, their conversation naturally turned to charitable initiatives supporting children and families. Madame Macron noticed the bracelet and commented on its elegance, which allowed Catherine to explain its significance to Diana's memory and the new committee that had been established to continue her charitable legacy. "It's a beautiful way to honor someone while continuing their important work," Madame Macron observed, and Catherine felt a sense of validation that her original intentions were being understood correctly. The formal dinner proceeded with its usual elaborate ceremony, but the atmosphere felt charged with additional significance. Every photograph taken during the meal would be scrutinized for signs of family tension or unity, every interaction analyzed for deeper meaning about the royal family's internal dynamics. Charles rose to give the traditional toast to the visiting head of state, but he had modified his prepared remarks to include the announcement about the Diana Legacy Committee. The decision to make this announcement during a state dinner was unprecedented, but it served to elevate the new initiative while also demonstrating the royal family's unity in supporting it. Tonight, we gather not only to celebrate the friendship between our two nations but also to honor the memory of someone who understood the power of bringing people together for worthy causes, Charles began, his voice carrying clearly through the formal dining room. The late Princess of Wales believed deeply in using privilege and position to support those in need, and her commitment to charitable work continues to inspire us all. The room fell particularly quiet as Charles continued. This evening, I am pleased to announce the establishment of the Diana Legacy Committee, which will ensure that her beautiful jewelry continues to serve meaningful charitable purposes while honoring her memory with the respect and dignity it deserves.
Catherine felt her eyes moisten slightly as Charles spoke about Diana's legacy.
The words captured exactly what she had hoped to achieve with her original request, even though the path to this moment had been more complicated than she had anticipated. The Princess of Wales wears tonight a bracelet that Diana treasured, which she wore while supporting causes close to her heart, Charles continued, gesturing slightly toward Catherine. This piece, and others from Diana's collection, will continue to support charitable initiatives through the committee's thoughtful oversight. The applause that followed felt genuine and warm, and Catherine noticed several guests turning to look at her bracelet with increased interest and appreciation. The formal announcement had provided context that transformed the jewelry from a potential source of controversy into a symbol of constructive charitable work. Sarah McCorkadale felt deeply moved by Charles's words and by the respectful way the announcement had been handled. The establishment of the committee represented exactly the kind of thoughtful approach to Diana's memory that she had hoped for, and seeing Catherine wear the emerald bracelet with such grace and appropriate dignity convinced her that the new system would work well. After the dinner, as guests moved to the blue drawing room for coffee and conversation, Catherine found herself surrounded by people interested in learning more about the Diana Legacy Committee and its planned activities. French officials expressed admiration for the way the royal family was honoring Diana's memory while continuing her charitable work, and several British guests asked how they might support the committee's future initiatives. William watched his wife navigate the social aspects of the evening with growing pride. The controversy that had seemed so damaging just weeks earlier had been transformed into an opportunity to create something genuinely meaningful in Diana's memory. Catherine's original instinct to honor Diana through wearing her jewelry had evolved into a much more substantial and lasting tribute. As the evening drew to a close, Catherine felt a sense of profound relief and satisfaction. The emerald bracelet had sparked dozens of conversations about Diana's charitable work and the importance of continuing her legacy. The press coverage would inevitably focus on the jewelry and the committee announcement, but the context was now constructive rather than controversial. King Charles approached Catherine near the end of the evening, his expression conveying both approval and affection. "You handled this beautifully," he said quietly. "Diana would have been proud of how you've honored her memory while advancing important causes." The words meant more to Catherine than any public praise could have. The journey from her original request to this evening's successful conclusion had taught her important lessons about the complexity of royal symbolism and the responsibility that came with honoring previous generations while building her own legacy. Sarah McCorkadale said her goodbyes with genuine warmth, expressing gratitude for the thoughtful way the situation had been resolved. "Diana always said that beautiful things should serve beautiful purposes," she told Catherine. Tonight proved that philosophy exactly right. As Catherine and William returned to Kensington Palace in the early hours of the morning, they both felt that an important chapter in Catherine's royal journey had been completed. The controversy that had seemed so threatening to her reputation and her relationships within the family had ultimately strengthened both, creating new structures for honoring the past while building the future. The emerald bracelet, carefully returned to its case after the evening's events, had served its purpose perfectly. It had honored Diana's memory while allowing Catherine to create her own meaningful contribution to royal tradition. The Diana Legacy Committee would ensure that future decisions about Diana's jewelry would be made thoughtfully and collaboratively, protecting her memory while allowing her beautiful possessions to continue supporting the causes she had loved. In the weeks that followed, the press coverage of the state dinner focused primarily on the establishment of the Diana Legacy Committee and the positive response it had received from both the Spencer family and the public. Catherine's wearing of the emerald bracelet was noted with approval rather than criticism, and several articles praised the royal family's approach to balancing respect for Diana's memory with practical support for charitable causes. The sapphire necklace that had started the entire controversy remained in the royal collection, still beautiful and significant, but no longer a source of family tension. The committee structure meant that someday, when the right occasion and cause aligned, it too might be worn again in service of Diana's values and memory. Catherine had learned important lessons about the weight of royal symbolism and the complexity of family relationships within the monarchy. But she had also proven to herself and others that her desire to honor Diana came from genuine admiration and commitment to service rather than from any wish to appropriate or replace Diana's unique place in history. The palace returned to its normal rhythms, but with new structures in place that would help future generations navigate the delicate balance between honoring the past and creating their own legacies. The Diana Legacy Committee would meet quarterly to review requests and plan charitable initiatives, ensuring that Diana's memory remained vibrant and meaningful rather than simply preserved under glass. Years later, when historians examined this period in royal history, they would note how a simple request for a piece of jewelry had evolved into a more sophisticated understanding of how the monarchy could honor its past while serving the present. The controversy that had seemed so threatening at the time had ultimately strengthened both family relationships and charitable initiatives, proving that even difficult moments could lead to positive outcomes when handled with care and wisdom. Catherine would go on to wear several other pieces from Diana's collection over the years, each time with the blessing of the committee and in service of causes that Diana had supported. The emerald bracelet became a particular favorite for children's charity events, where its beauty could draw attention to important work while honoring the memory of someone who had cared deeply about young people's welfare. The legacy of those weeks of controversy was not conflict or division, but rather a deeper understanding within the royal family about how to navigate the complex emotions surrounding Diana's memory while ensuring that her values and commitments continued to make a difference in the world.